Okay, welcome back to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight on your brain. Hopefully it's just, a single shot this time and not a meandering, wandering chugging of the whole bottle.
Well, we do have time constraints this time,
Exactly.
so
So we're going to kind of go back over some things we talked about over the weekend, but in a more condensed and focused fashion. Um, and we were gonna have some sexy time, but the NFL made me mad. And it reminded me of some things that I meant to mention. I kind of talked about, but I didn't say this explicitly because you had already given up on them. So I don't know if you saw this news, but I was watching Jason Whitlock's show and just learned that the NFL has declared that it is going to make the Black National Anthem part of its pregame ceremonies.
where is this Black Nation?
And how is it not offensive to, uh, Indians and Chinese and Native Americans and blah, blah, blah? Don't they have their own anthems? Shouldn't they have their own anthems? But here's why it annoyed me, and here's what it made me think of that I left out from uh, from our last discussion is so when I was watching High on the Hog, the reason I thought that guy needed a white trash sidekick going through the cuisine of Western Africa and how that related back to, Southern comfort food, soul food cooking, and how similar it was. It is because one of the things he kept saying is he kept referring to his roots and his history, and and there's an element of truth to that, and I can understand the emotional appeal, but in a broader sense, that's our history. Okay, now yes, if you can trace your roots directly to, you know, a slave or a specific thing, then that's your specific family history. But in the broader context, the good, the bad, and the ugly is part of all of our history. It's something that we all have to recognize, all have to think about, and all have to learn from. I think I've mentioned this in the past, but there's this annoying meme that goes around, and yeah, it's worth a chuckle, but it's also kind of dumb. That's basically a counter to the critical theory reparations mentality, and it lists all these terrible things that were done to to Irish immigrants, and then the punchline is that you don't hear any people complaining or asking for reparations because Irish aren't pussies. All right, well, worth a chuckle, but let's be real here. Yeah, as bad as things were for not just the Irish, but Jewish immigrants, Italian immigrants, not even Italian immigrants. There was kind of a segregation between Italian immigrants and Sicilian immigrants, even because people suck. That's how we are. But it's not the same as being subject to slavery, to bondage, and to all the horrors that go along with that.
Well,
So
and
we
one
do
one
have to
thing they're
recognize
also
there's a
correct
difference.
about is that there's a obvious uh, physical marker that you
Mm-hmm.
can easily use for present day discrimination. So that is something
Yes, yes.
that is true. So, people don't look at a redhead and say, "Oh, I remember the Irish were bad." I remember there there is nothing like that with an Italian or an Irish, especially since we're so mixed up now.
Yes.
Uh, so that's one place they have it right. That there is this, I can look at you, and if I'm a prejudiced person, I can
Mm-hmm.
automatically have those thoughts. So that is one thing that is correct in all that, and that's why the Irish meme is probably not applicable, even though they
Exactly.
did have a rough time.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I'm trying to decide where we want to go with this because uh,
Well, let me give you the example, and I'm going to try not to go off on revisit my Kaepernick rant, but this is what I mean by this is our history. Um, Where are you? Here you are.
Well,
Okay.
well, while you're looking at that, it's there is nothing wrong with being proud of your ancestors' contribution to current
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
current culture, and that's something that should be celebrated.
Yes.
It's when it derails and it says, well, you America wouldn't be what it is without me.
Right. Or when when you blur that pride in your specific ancestry to somehow make yourself part of that story beyond just these are my ancestors and this is what they did and I'm proud of that.
Well, and
Uh,
the further blurring is you're trying with the CRT crowd
mhm.
is the blurring that they're trying to uh, put that to, so part of the ancestry in the pride, but also part of the ancestry in the we are oppressed.
Yes. So specifically what I'm talking about is, so you read Shelby Steele's White Guilt and he relates some very specific and obvious racism that happened to him as a child because he's old enough that he grew up when segregation was still the law of the land. How in the world is some upper middle class black kid growing up in the suburbs of Connecticut related to that? How is his experience that in any way except they share a similar pigment of skin? In the same way that the dingleberries who are sharing the Irish meme. Okay, well, yes, the Irish were oppressed. You weren't, so shut up. and and this is what I mean when I'm thinking and talking about our history and why I got annoyed that the yelling at each other over the kneeling for the national anthem was all around the issue and no one was actually talking about the issue. This is William Carney. If you've seen the movie Glory, the Denzel Washington character is very, 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 very loosely based on William Carney. Um, more in action than who the guy actually was. He's the first black recipient of the Medal of Honor, and the the picture here is after he was awarded the medal in 1900, and this picture here with the flag, that is the actual flag uh, that he took up when the color bearer was shot and killed. Uh, and this is him posing after the battle with a cane to help him stand up because he was severely wounded. Um,
Hold on,
the
hold that thought for just a second.
Okay, collect my thoughts anyway. Okay, so little hiccup there. Um, but back to Sergeant William Carney. His story is so inspiring to anyone. And again, this is our history. We should know this. Um, the 54th Massachusetts uh, uh, assaulted a heavily fortified fort, frontal assault style, the way they did in the Civil War, because dumb, and were absolutely decimated. As the men advanced, they were immediately hit by a barrage of canister musketry and shelling from the fort. A bullet struck the 54th's color sergeant, and as the wounded man faltered, Carney threw down his gun, seized the flag, and moved to the front of the 54th's assaulting ranks. He soon found himself alone on the fort's wall with bodies of dead and wounded comrades all around him. The official citation really doesn't do it justice. When the color sergeant was shot down, this soldier grasped the flag, led the way to the parapet, and planted the colors thereon. When the troops fell back, he brought off the flag under a fierce fire, in which he was twice severely wounded. He was wounded several more times beyond that, but just twice severely to the extent that his life was in danger. And yet, when he made his way back to the Union lines, he was alone because everyone around him had been killed. and a member of the 100th New York came up to help him and said, "Let me carry the colors for you." And Kearney refused, saying only a member of the 54th should carry the 54th's colors. And so he carried the colors all the way back to the lines himself. And when he got back to the rest of the regiment, they cheered him, and he is reported as saying, "Boys, I only did my duty. The flag never touched the ground." Again, I'm trying not to go off on the Kaepernick rant, but
Oh no, yeah, I see what you're. I mean, there's no other way you can go with this. It's
yes.
yeah, because now we're talking the national anthem. We
Mhm.
originally with Cap, we were talking the flag. Uh, but my whole problem with all of this, and I've seen the memes come with Carney from the right now that are like
Oh, really?
maybe they should teach this in school when it
Mhm.
comes to the flag, and all kinds of different ways of provoke not in a provoking manner try to counter the kneeling for the flag. And it's distracting minutia. It's not the point. The point is we're this whole activist movement, it has nothing to do with the flag. They say it's a symbol of racism and blah blah
Mhm.
blah,
Mhm.
but it has nothing to do with the flag. It's two things, and the national anthem thing is one of them. It's create a reaction and use that reaction as evidence. That's the kneeling for the national anthem, etc. And then how much can we make you do in the name of? Because it's just one thing after the other after the other. Can I make you take this statue down? Can I make you change the name of this stadium? Can I make you put this arbitrary black national anthem as before the national anthem at every game?
Mhm.
What can I make you do? And that has two things. Again, you're still provoking the opposition to try to get more evidence, quote unquote. And the other part is you create, and this is again, we're going to go back to cults. You're creating a situation where people are giving up stuff. The more you pay, the more you're going to justify the direction you went. So after you've changed the name of your stadium, after you've put this before the national anthem, after you've allowed these commercials on, after you've donated a lot of money, you're going to defend them because you're defending yourself. You're defending your own decisions. So you're going to defend the activist group now. And part of it is it's the dissonance you create in yourself because you try to justify your own past decisions.
That's that's a good point, a good place to take this, because I mean this is why we started out talking about mob psychology and being mindful of these things, and why you have your four layers of the critical of those impacted by critical theory, which includes those who go along to get along. You're you're being gaslit, you're being purposely divided, you're being purposely segregated. It's a divide and conquer mentality. So the reason I bring up someone like Carney is to again say, no, this is our history, these are our symbols collectively, despite whatever specific political or religious or philosophical differences we have. We do have uniting principles. And so shut up and stop trying to divide us with these things, and stop trying to destroy these core values that create American culture. Because but on the other hand, as we've been talking about the annoying on the right memes, it's important to understand that, as I said, that's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So yes, if there are people using Carney to make memes about the flag, it it's an inspiring example of uh, of the American serviceman, and what he will put himself through for uh, his fellow soldiers and for the country. But it's also true that this is a man who was born into slavery. Okay, this was a man who was born into a system that did not treat him as a human being. Now, I mean, if you go back and you read the literature of the era of those um, defending slavery, it's pretty gross the way they compare black slaves to cattle. And there's a reason they call it chattel slavery. Okay, because to these people, there was no difference between their pigs and their black slaves. That is also an important thing to remember.
Well, this is the opposite side of the same thing. This is the mirror image of the movements now. It was the success of the people who wanted to perpetuate that industry in othering and objectifying other people just because of an immutable part of your body.
Mhm.
And so now we've got the same thing going on the other side.
And flipping it back around, it is also true that even though Carney was born into this horrible institution of Southern slavery, when he escaped to the North, he intended on becoming a minister. And he said in the Liberator, which was probably the biggest abolitionist newspaper, that the reason he left his pursuit of the ministry and joined the newly forming colored regiments in the Civil War is because he said, I decided this was the best way to serve God and my country.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be able to hold these seemingly contradictory thoughts in our head, that there was an element of America that was grotesque, cruel, and contrary to our core values. And yet there were also people who were subject to that cruelty who still felt this is my country
Mm-hmm.
and I'm willing to die for it.
Well, and he was at a moment of time where his contribution would make a difference, and that helps too. And he could see that. He could see, if we win this war, things will be better for me and my family and my people who resemble me.
Yeah.
And if I die in the process, well, if we don't do it at all, I might as well be dead, because I'm no more than an animal to these people.
Yeah.
And so that's the big difference, is he was in that moment of time. Up in the early 2000s, as we went to when these big movements started here, we were in a moment of time where things were getting better, and we're making them worse now. That's my big beef. We were doing the right things, and there were still changes to be made, but they were incremental changes.
I have an example of how things are getting worse. That's kind of a silly example. It's not as hardcore and serious as slavery and the Civil War. The movie Black Panther, okay, which I thought was fine. It was an okay movie.
No, I thought it was a good movie.
Yeah. I got really annoyed at the talk around it, and it kind of ruined the experience for me a little bit. I had to stop. I had to purposely try and stay away before I watched it, because I was sure that the movie itself was not going to be anywhere close to the hysteria and controversy around it, with all the people shouting at each other, shouting past each other. But what made me mad about it, again, wasn't the movie. It was this idea that finally we have black heroes. Young black kids have heroes that look like them, that they can look up to. Okay, well, first of all, that's very insulting to the great Mr. Wesley Snipes and Blade, which was an awesome movie that apparently everybody forgot about.
The first one, none after that.
I apparently liked the third one a lot more than most people did. I thought it was pretty good. Anyway, but actually my main thought was, hold on a second. If your kid can't be inspired by Captain America because they don't share the same pigment, that's a problem with you. That's a you problem as a parent. Okay, any child, when they have that young fantastical imagination, should be able to be inspired by a character like Captain America, who is a paragon of of manly virtues and American values. I'll use myself as an example. I think I've mentioned this before. Um, I was greatly inspired as a wee lad reading a biography of Jackie Robinson, because any child should be inspired by his character and his resilience in the face of uh, uh, incredibly cruel and inhumane treatment, and what he did and how he overcame that. I don't care what the color of your skin is. You should be inspired by that as a person, as an American. You know, for me, so much so that I modeled my game after Jackie Robinson because I was so impressed by his story. Whereas most kids want to, you know, point out to center field and be Babe Ruth from an early age. Basically, as soon as kid pitch started, I would step into an inside pitch because I just wanted to get on base,
And this
because
is
I
where
wanted to be able to run the bases like Jackie Robinson because he was so inspiring.
this is where I can agree in some regards to you,
Mm-hmm.
but also disagree, because there is something to, especially in children, to
Mm-hmm.
the internal bias where you see someone who looks like you
Yeah.
actually does play into how you receive the information coming in, and there's nothing wrong with that. So
Yeah.
this is one place that, again, the people we're talking about are kind of right about, and then we should have this representation in media, and that's okay. Now, where it goes wrong, and this is where you have to think abstractly because you have to know the strategies of activism, is when they start taking away from one to do the other, and then put it in a way where you get caught in a Kafka trap. So so say Black Panther, nothing wrong with that. He was the Black Panther, and Wakanda was an African country that was invisible or something, and and they brought that into the limelight, and everybody loved it, and it gave young Black people a superhero to look up to. That there's nothing wrong with that, and that's perfectly fine, and it actually is part of our internal bias to some degree. Okay, that's fine. But when you start doing things like making Ariel Black, or purposefully taking a fantasy series like Wheel of Time and making a diverse cast, when the one of the points of the whole book was it was a lack of diversity around this continent, which was what's separating everybody. And then it was the overcoming that. Jordan already put a diversity message in his books because it was everybody having to come together for a
But he
greater
didn't beat
good.
you over the head with it.
Yeah, and so things like that, or the Supergirl series where Jimmy Olsen, they made a Black man, and
Mm-hmm.
it when you start doing things like that, it's not to increase diversity, but that's what they'll say. It's to increase diversity. How can you argue with that? It's to provoke the other side, because you know the backlash from the Wheel of Time. Everybody's like, no, they describe these people this way in the book, and
Mm-hmm.
it was what I said, the fact that you can say, oh, that person's from here because of this way they look, and then all of a sudden they're throwing it all around in the name of diversity. There's two goals to it. They disguise it as the making, bringing other people into the conversation, when it's really to provoke the other side and get a reaction, because everybody that said, no, this person's supposed to be this, is like, oh, well, you white supremacist. And so it's the separating of the binary, instead of having this big group in the middle that can get along because of the reaction you're trying to provoke. And so that's where it goes off the rails. There is nothing wrong with representation in media, but it's when you do it in a way designed to provoke the other side. That's where I draw the line.
So that's not where I thought you were going. And what jumped into my mind when you said where it goes off the rails is, and I think this is a smaller scale, more personal scale, because what you're talking about is the activist trying to drive the messaging. And to me, where that kind of representation goes wrong is when you make uh, the secondary physical characteristics the point. Okay,
Mm.
so yeah, it's fine, it's good, it's healthy even for for young kids whose brains are still developing, uh, to see, to read about um, people who are like them, because then they on a subconscious level can think, oh well, I can do this too. Where it becomes problematic to me is going back to my original, the point of my Black Panther analogy is, if your kid can't be inspired by these heroes, by these archetypes, um because of the color of their skin, that's on you as a parent, because you're making a point of pointing this out. You're making this obvious to them. You're making uh, uh, race and racial characteristics um, something that they are consciously thinking about, when at a young age they shouldn't be consciously thinking about these things.
Well, why can't the answer be a little bit of both?
Hmm.
At a young age, they can see this thing that they identify with because they can
Mhm.
look in a mirror and see themselves and then see this on screen. And that helps them develop this I can do that mentality. But also, as we get older, how about teaching your kids to say, hey, this is a virtue we think is productive in a
Yeah.
pro-social society, and Captain America represents this virtue. And so we like that too. So why can't it be both? Why
Mhm.
can't we have the representation, but also separate real virtue from immutable characteristics, right? So the answer is, why can't we have our cake and eat it too in this situation? Why does it have to be one or the other? I think that's kind of one of the big points of our whole podcast is, why does it
Yeah.
have to be
Yeah.
one or the other? Or sometimes, why does it have to be either or? Why can't it be neither? Uh, but to me, I think the big line is drawn with the dishonesty. We're doing this for this purpose. No, you're not.
Mhm.
CRT taught me that black people were brought into the military, promised home loans, and they didn't get them when they come back. It's during World War II. It's like, no, CRT didn't teach you that. CRT teaches you that there are oppression hierarchies still today, and then uses facts like that to try to justify
Yep.
their reasoning and bring you in the door, and actually not only bring you in the door, but bring you in the door in an emotional way, so you'll be more receptive to their nonsense. uh Ibram X Kendi, it, what people don't do when they read a book is look at the citations. They read a sentence, see that it's cited, and say must be true. And so one in particular I'm thinking of, he was alluding to uh, modern day discrimination with home loans. And there was a citation after one of his sentences on home loan discrimination. And I went and looked it up, and it was a news article from 1920. So he was alluding to modern day discrimination in home
Wow.
loans, but his source was a news article from 1920, wherein undoubtedly there was discrimination on
Mhm.
home loans based on race because it was 1920. So these things are being used to suck you in the door, but it's the dishonesty that goes along with it. That's where I draw the line. Same with the national anthem. It's not, the point isn't because we're proud of whatever brought this national anthem to the forefront and that represents us. The point is, piss off the right, piss off anybody who thinks that's ridiculous, use it as evidence that the US is racist, and pass more policies that are actually uh, racist in the direction against the white oppressor. So that's the whole point, and it's the
Yeah.
dishonesty that pisses me off.
Yeah. So as we've said before and ad nauseum, take a breath. Don't just automatically share every meme you see because triggers an emotional reaction, take a breath and think about the true root of whatever is going on, and ask, does it even matter? Okay. Do I need to get worked up over this?
Mhm.
Or if I do need to get worked up over this, what should I be worked up about? Should I be worked up about this person or what this person said? Or is there a deeper a deeper philosophical issue at work here that we need to be talking about, that I need to be thinking about, and we as a group of friends or a neighborhood or country need to be talking about?
Well, and in defense, in your own defense, when you're presented with something extreme like this, don't impulse buy.
Mm.
Don't impulse buy. Don't say yes or no right away. Say, hey, I need to know more about this. Because when you impulse buy, you got to defend that purchase. And when you have to defend the purchase, you're going to cherry pick and select data that supports your purchase. So don't impulse buy, and you don't have to defend that later. So
That's a good analogy. Yeah. That's a really good way to look at it.
well, people ask how we can consider ourselves experts. This is something I've had to deal with my career a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I learned to ask when someone says, hey, what do you think about XYZ product or nutrition shake or fill in the blank? I learned to ask, did you already buy it? Because I have lost clients that when, okay, let me look at it, look it up. It's kind of not any better than any other protein shake, or yeah, it's kind of a gimmick or whatever my final unbiased, because I didn't know anything else about it, conclusion was, and then get all the marketing selling points as a counter argument for this product and find out later they already bought it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're defending their purchase. So it works the same when it comes to ideologies, because the more you commit to something, the more likely you are to keep going down that rabbit hole and keep defending yourself.
Speaking of bait
Yes.
and switch and defending your bad decisions, let's talk about how I'm a fat fatty.
All right. So we talked about my nutrition ideology in the last one, which basically works from the bottom up instead of the top down. So we start with your protein and fat needs, your macronutrient needs, before we get to total calories, etc. So I'm actually going to take Heath through some of the calculations here, because I think it would help kind of illustrate what I was talking about. All right, we got my screen here.
All right. Yep. Got the spreadsheet up of fat fattiness.
So we're a male. How old?
Oh God, I have to do math. Am I 42 now?
You're a year older than me, so yes, if I remember correctly. Depending on what
Almost
time of
42. So we'll go with that. Close enough.
With that. What's your current weight?
I think 205.
205. And your height?
5'11.
5'11, so 71 inches. And so you exercise, but otherwise relatively.
Yeah, and this one is always a bit harder to estimate, and it's something kind of like with counting calories. You need to be honest with yourself, and also may need to adjust for people following along at home.
Sorry, I had to adjust an equation because I had worked with somebody who wanted more of a loss, so I did 75%.
Now let's explain activity level a little more, because that's going to have a big impact on your base caloric needs.
Yeah, and most calorie calculators out there use a system where it's basically a 0 to 2 scale, where 0 would be completely sedentary, where you don't even ever get out of bed, and 2 would be you have a very vigorous job, very vigorous daily life, and you probably exercise. So
Right.
two would probably be your high level CrossFit Games competitors, where they're basically constantly working out, or a high level bodybuilder that's got 4-hour workouts every day and
Hmm.
still works for a living. So most people who exercise and have a relatively non-sedentary lifestyle, somewhere about a 1 to 1.5. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I went in, since I know kind of how the lifting Heath does, and then he also does his gardening and everything on the side, I put a 1.5 for him. Uh, and again, don't get caught up in the details here. I just wanted to go over where we get kind of our numbers from.
And
So
also what you mean by bottom up rather than top down,
yes.
because I think that's important. That's the most important part of your approach here.
Okay. And I actually have this set in the calculator for a weight loss. If you want to go with that.
Hmm.
Okay. So uh, for weight loss, I have them set to 500 calorie a day deficit, which is probably the upper end of where you want to go with somebody. And part of it's because he's a bigger male versus if I had a 120-pound female, we probably would want less of that because it's going to be a bigger percentage of their body weight.
Right. It's like we ranted about last time of where in the world did people come up with this 1,200 or 2,000 or whatever calories per day? How in the world is that even remotely the same when you have a 200-pound
Mhm.
male and a 150-pound female or 115-pound female? Ooh, that's a big difference.
Okay, so protein needs. Well, we got them at the 1 gram per pound body weight, 205. That equals 820 calories because protein has energy, right?
Hmm.
Fat needs 82 grams, which is 738 calories. All right. So those are the two building blocks. And I worry more about the grams than the calories, but we need the calories to know how much more you can
Yes.
eat on top of that.
Yes.
So total energy needs minus those two numbers gives us our play calories, which is everything in between you getting the building blocks versus how much you can eat and still and not gain weight.
Hmm.
But then we also adjusted it for that weight loss. So per this, if he wanted to lose about a pound or two of fat a week, but still maintain everything he's got and perform at a high level, he's got about 720 calories worth of play. Does that make sense?
Right. And so
And
now
that could
let's
be,
see.
and
There's 7 calories per gram of alcohol. So that means I can have 100 grams of alcohol.
yes.
Uh, Before we move on, something I want to point out, because this is kind of where my brain goes when I think about normal people looking at this. So look at the difference there between protein and fat. You have uh, less than half the amount of fat in grams, and yet you're pretty close in the calories. This is something I struggle to get people to understand, is that fat doesn't make you fat per se. The reason fat can be bad when it comes to weight gain is because for every gram of fat has a lot of calories,
Mm-hmm.
right? On average, we're talking nine calories per gram of fat. So it's really easy to go into a caloric surplus if you're eating a lot of fat.
Mm-hmm.
But if something has fat in it per se, that's not necessarily a bad thing unless we're talking, junk fat, junk food fat.
Yeah. Well, and another important point is your play calories. Realistically, you can also describe them as your energy needs,
Hmm.
because if we need the building blocks here to actually create parts of our body,
Yep.
then we also need energy to do that. So you need to have a certain amount of food on top of that. And we can make energy out of all the different, or otherwise they wouldn't have a caloric value. So we can make energy
Hmm.
out of a protein. We can make energy out of a fat molecule. We can make energy out of a carbohydrate. So you could, and the reason I do this way is because I want as much freedom as possible. So when I say you've got 723 calories to play with, you can make that all carbohydrate if you want.
Mhm.
You can make that all fat and protein if you want to be keto. You can make that, this can be vegetables or animal protein. You can be a vegan and still do it this way. You can do Atkins and still do it this way. You can do Whole30 and go through all of their various rules, which basically means you can't eat anything anymore, and still do it this way as long as you eat something.
Yeah, yeah, and we're back to the kind of rule one of dieting, which is the one you'll stick with,
mhm.
right?
So if you have an eating preference, fit it in here. And the other part is when you have a protein number like that, just sticking with that becomes the hardest part of the whole thing. And I don't want any of it to be hard, but that becomes the hardest part of it. And you find that because protein is inherently satiating and you feel more full, then if you do that, a lot of times this part is easier and you don't feel like you're dieting, which is another important part.
Right.
If you feel like you're dieting, then, and you're depriving yourself of a lot of things, then you're less likely to stick with it.
Right. Which is why I also tend to advise people to, if they're trying to lose weight, start a little higher. Okay.
Mhm.
But better that you start, just barely below maintenance and work your way down than you start at a point where you're constantly feeling hungry and deprived, and then you binge and just give up and don't want to stick with it.
Mhm. And again, treat that as an average. If you go over by 300 one day and you go under by 300 another day and you go over by 100 one, that it's perfectly fine as long as you're averaging around that amount.
Right.
And that's where tracking comes in too. And the other harder part is tracking everything because it can be annoying at first, but we got free apps. MyFitPal, almost every food you can buy when you go out is in there now. You could
Yes.
put Fuddruckers, whatever, such and such burger in there, and
Oh
they
yeah.
have all of that already for you. So
Yeah, and that's the one I use to, in large part, for the scanning ability, so that, because I don't eat out much, so I don't have to worry about that part of it.
yeah,
But
that's
if
right. You can just scan the barcode
you
now.
scan a barcode and it knows what that is, and it knows all. So then all you have to worry about is measuring out your servings,
Mhm.
which isn't that hard if you can guesstimate, and if not, you can get a kitchen scale for really cheap.
Yeah.
And once you do that for a while, you'll have a pretty good idea of, okay, well, what X number of ounces looks like.
Well, and the when I talked about the defending yourself from buying something,
Mhm.
if you don't buy a kitchen scale, you don't care. If you don't track your calories, you don't care. And actually, you can create a positive change from that negative thing I just talked about earlier. You
Mhm.
can buy a kitchen scale and then you'll use it. You can start tracking and say 20 minutes a day to put in your food, and that's a commitment you've made, and the more you do it, the more you're going to stick to your diet, because now you've got to defend that time. So these concepts that I talk about in a negative way also have positive implications.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have a tendency to do them as human beings. Logical fallacies are fallacies for a reason, because we have a tendency to do them because in some ways, in a productive way, they're survival mechanisms. Uh, and so, yeah, go buy that kitchen scale. Go buy those measuring cups, and then do that for a little bit, and you're going to inherently commit to what you're doing.
Yep.
Yep. And that's probably where we need to close out for today. So I think this was a much more condensed version, and I think it will be more palatable to most people.
Yep. Helpful and focused, hopefully. So just go think, and I promise we'll do sexy time next time.
All right.